The mountains pressed in on forward operating base Epsilon like silent, watchful giants. At sunrise, the peaks caught fire in the first light, casting long shadows down into the valley where the base huddled. From above, Epsilon might have looked like a steel splinter jammed into the earth, necessary but unwelcome. Inside the operations tent, morning activity had its own rhythm. The whir of ventilation fans, the clatter of folding tables being shifted, the muted hum of officers swapping clipped reports. Radios hissed intermittently with distant voices, thin and metallic. Maps, weather charts, and satellite images littered the central table like a gambler's chaotic hand. In the far corner, behind a desk too small for its clutter, sat Specialist Adair Coltrane. She was a quiet figure, lean and still, as if she were carved from concentration itself. Her worn leather notebook lay open before her, page after page crammed with precise equations and strange notations. She held her pen lightly, but with intent, each stroke deliberate, the way a sniper handles a rifle. A stray curl of auburn hair slipped across her cheek, but she didn't move to brush it back. The numbers had her full attention. Around her, men came and went without a glance in her direction. No one stopped to ask what she was working on. No one invited her into the morning huddle. She might as well have been part of the furniture, functional, unobtrusive, and easy to overlook. Lieutenant Finch's voice rose over the tense background murmur. "Wind patterns are looking unusual today," he said, fanning a set of printed weather reports across the main table. "We may see reduced visibility by midday. Could affect targeting accuracy." Adair's pen hesitated mid-formula. She noted those same patterns 3 days ago. The valley's jagged terrain funneled the wind in strange, counterintuitive ways. Standard targeting adjustments ignored that complexity, at a cost. She had already recalculated the angles, factoring in the precise turbulence points and pockets of still air. Her adjustments weren't in any manual, but she knew they would work. Commander Thaddeus Blackwell arrived then, the tent shifting subtly around his presence. He had the stride of a man who knew he was in charge, the crisp uniform of someone who expected to be listened to, and the gaze of a man who measured people in seconds. He greeted his officers with nods, his tone brisk. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. The extra weight on that last word wasn't lost on Adair. He scanned the reports Finch had laid out. Status. She rose quietly, notebook in hand, and stepped toward the circle. When Finch finished, she cleared her throat, her voice steady but soft. "Sir, I've been tracking the wind shifts since they began. Standard corrections won't compensate for the valley's funnel effect. I've developed an adjustment model that—" "I don't recall asking for your input, Specialist," Blackwell said without looking at her. "You're here to observe, not advise." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. A few officers glanced at her with something like pity, others with indifference. Adair's expression didn't change. Only a flicker in her eyes betrayed the steel beneath her calm. She nodded once, returned to her desk, and resumed writing. From across the tent, a young voice cut into the lull. Corporal Zephyr Reed, fresh-faced, curious, and still unjaded, hovered near her desk when the chaos ebbed. "Those calculations," he said quietly, "are they really that different from standard?" She studied his face, searching for sarcasm, but found only genuine interest. Without a word, she rotated her notebook so he could see. "The wind speeds increase here and here," she said, tapping 2 points on a rough valley sketch. "But at this elevation, there's an almost complete lull. Standard formulas overcompensate. That would throw your trajectory 30 meters off." Reed's eyes widened. "That's brilliant. Where did you learn?" "Corporal Reed." Major Denton's voice snapped from across the room. "Stop pestering the observer. Make yourself useful." Reed gave her an apologetic shrug before retreating. She turned the notebook back toward herself, jotting a single note in the margin. Standard protocol. Insufficient for valley conditions. The day pressed on. Reports came in, were analyzed, dismissed, or escalated. Adair worked without pause, her equations evolving like living things. When satellite imagery displayed movement in the eastern sector, Most eyes saw only dust trails. Adair saw something else, a subtle ripple in the northern pass that didn't fit the prevailing wind. She stepped forward. "Sir, there's movement along the northern route." "That could be." Blackwell's voice sliced through hers. "Your job is to observe, not analyze, not interrupt. Clear?" "Yes, sir," she said, her tone even. But as she stepped back, she caught the smirk Denton didn't bother to hide. And when Blackwell muttered something to him that earned a laugh, she didn't need to hear the words to know the gist. She opened to a fresh page and began again, this time for moving targets under variable winds. The calculations took form under her hand, as precise as clockwork. Nobody noticed. Not yet. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering against the tent walls. It carried the sharp bite of mountain air and the faint, distant scent of dust. Adair's pen didn't stop. By mid-afternoon, the valley had turned restless. The wind moved in unpredictable bursts, one moment still enough to hear a pin drop, the next rattling loose canvas flaps, and sending grit skittering across the ground. It was the kind of weather that made people uneasy without knowing why. Adair knew why. From her corner desk in the operations tent, she traced her fingertip along a hand-drawn map of the valley's contours. To the untrained eye, the lines were nothing more than terrain markings. To her, they were the bones of a living thing, dictating how air funneled, swirled, and collided. The valley didn't obey conventional mathematics. It had its own rules, ones she'd spent days unraveling. Her pencil scratched across the page, adding another set of figures. She was mapping not just the geography, but the wind's personality, where it accelerated between two ridges, where it dropped into sudden stillness, where it curled back on itself like a whip. At the central table, the officers leaned over satellite images from that morning. The chatter was routine until the intelligence feed lit up with a new frame, a cluster of dust trails moving where they shouldn't have been. "Eastern sector," Lieutenant Finch said, leaning closer. "Convoy." "No," replied Major Denton. "Winds kicking up loose soil. Probably nothing." Adair's gaze sharpened. The dust wasn't random. The spread was too linear. More importantly, the disturbance sat along the northern route, a track rarely used because of the narrow passes and steep drop-offs. She stepped forward, notebook in hand. "Sir, the northern pass is active. That dust pattern suggests multiple vehicles moving in staggered formation. If they're—" Blackwell didn't even turn to face her. "Specialist Coltrane, I'll repeat myself. Observation only. No analysis. No suggestions. No interruptions." The words dropped like stones into the room's silence. "Yes, sir," she said evenly. But her eyes lingered on the screen for a heartbeat longer before she retreated. At her desk, she turned to a clean page and began drafting a new set of formulas, this time for moving targets within the valley's microclimate. The equations flowed quickly, each variable locking into place with the next. This wasn't guesswork. It was inevitability written in numbers. Corporal Reed appeared again, this time pretending to reorganize a stack of maps near her desk. His voice was low. "You saw something, didn't you?" Her pencil didn't stop. "If I did, it's not my job to say so." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'd listen." She glanced up, meeting his eyes. The sincerity, there was a rare thing in this place. "Then listen carefully," she said, lowering her voice further. "The northern pass gives the convoy high ground for at least 2 kilometers before it narrows. If they move fast, they can be at the valley mouth in under 10 minutes once they commit. Standard trajectory won't hit them there. The wind pocket will push the projectile wide. By how much? 30 to 70 meters, depending on their speed." "That's enough to miss entirely," he muttered. "Exactly." Before he could respond, Major Denton called across the room. "Reed, stop loitering." Reed gave her a brief nod and moved away. The afternoon wore on, the wind growing wilder. Outside, the mountains seemed to hum with it, the sound low and steady like some distant engine. Adair made note after note, her handwriting small but deliberate. A sudden shout broke the monotony. "Intel update. The communications officer called. Eastern movement confirmed. Non-hostile supply convoy, local allies. The tension in the tent eased, and the officers returned to their paperwork. But Adair kept her eyes on the untouched northern sector of the map. If she were moving forces through this terrain, that's where she'd come in. Quiet, hidden, with the wind covering any dust or sound until it was too late. By evening, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind shifted direction twice in less than an hour, something most didn't notice, but Adair had been anticipating. She adjusted her formulas accordingly, adding notations in the margin. Shift possible every 27 to 34 minutes. Trajectory impact. Significant. When she closed her notebook, the leather cover was warm from her hands. She tucked it into her pack, aware that if anyone really wanted to know what she was capable of, all they had to do was flip it open. But no one here ever asked. As the lights dimmed in the operations tent, Blackwell walked past her desk without a word, his attention fixed on his own notes. Denton followed, tossing her a glance that hovered somewhere between dismissive and amused. Only Reed lingered long enough to offer her a small, knowing look. She didn't return it, but her grip on the notebook tightened just slightly. The wind outside whispered against the canvas, carrying dust from the passes she knew too well. Somewhere beyond the ridges, forces were moving. She couldn't prove it, not yet. But the valley's patterns told her the truth long before the reports would. And if those forces came through the northern pass, she already knew exactly where they'd be standing when they met her calculations. Dawn broke like a blade. Thin light cut the valley into bands of silver and slate, the kind of morning that looks clean until you taste the grit the wind has lifted overnight. Base Epsilon came alive in layers, boots, zippers, radios, then the sharp clack of rifle bolts being checked out of muscle memory. Someone swore about the cold. Someone laughed too loud to be comfortable. Adair was already awake, already at her desk with a notebook open to a page she'd marked in pencil the night before. Moving targets, variable winds, nonlinear acceleration. Her coffee went cold while she rechecked the math. She could feel the valley shifting even without looking up, the pressure, the direction, the strange pauses when the air seemed to hold its breath. The klaxon wailed. Contact, northern approach, the comms officer shouted, voice straining against the siren. Multiple vehicles, fast. Adair's pen stopped mid-stroke. She didn't need the drone feed to know which road they'd chosen. The northern pass. Of course. The tent dissolved into practiced chaos. Officers snapped to stations, keyboards rattled, the projector coughing a cone of light onto the central screen. Static, then a sharpened image. 6 armored vehicles in staggered formation, the lead one bulkier, bristling with antennae. They were taking the bends tight, pushing more speed than anyone sane would push on that road. Identity. Commander Blackwell demanded, voice even but pitched to carry. Working, said intelligence. Thermal signatures match previous sightings of Kadam's command convoy. Confirming. The name landed with a collective intake of breath. A high-value target, and not a rumor this time. Primary mortar team, to positions, Blackwell said. I want an intercept at the valley mouth. Calculate trajectory for their exit point. Adair's hand moved on its own, flipping pages. In the space the team called certainty, she saw a gap. Sir, she said, stepping forward without waiting to be asked. The wind pocket at the mid-valley choke will pull standard fire wide by at least 30 meters. They'll gain speed in the next 9 minutes. Your intercept will lag. Blackwell didn't turn. Specialist Coltrane, return to your observation post. Sir, the course correction must be front-loaded. You need to lead the target by observation post. He still hadn't looked at her. Major Denton smirked in profile. Let the men handle it, he added, almost conversationally, as if he were commenting on the weather. The words didn't sting. They simply slotted into a familiar pattern, the expected error term in a messy equation. Adair stepped back, eyes sliding from the commander to the drone feed to the empty secondary mortar position no one had manned yet. On the screen, the convoy hit the narrowest part of the pass and surged, engines snarling in thin air. The lead vehicle, the command unit, hugged the inside of a bend and flattened its acceleration, curved the way a good driver does when he knows there's danger on the straight. Someone in that cab could calculate, too. Good. She preferred worthy problems. Convoy approaching, grid Charlie Echo 7. The drone operator called. ETA, Valley exit 5 minutes. Primary team, status, Blackwell said. Plotting, came the reply over radio. Adjusting for standard wind shear. Adair crossed the tent without asking permission. The secondary mortar sat ready but unattended, like a spare key under a flower pot. She ran practiced hands over the body. Angle locks, elevation, traverse, small confirmations that let her breathe. The weapon smelled like oil and old thunder. Coltrane, Corporal Reed hissed, appearing at her shoulder. What would you do? She didn't look up. Lead by 70 at current speed. Adjust for the lull at the center seam. Then add, she recalculated on a breath. 3 degrees for the rebound gust. Their acceleration model is nonlinear because the driver is behaviorally anticipating an ambush at the exit. He'll push hard in the bend, then briefly plateau. We take him at the plateau. Reed blinked. You've already done this. Something like it. Back at the board, voices spiked. You're overcorrecting. No, at that angle the round will. Enough, Blackwell snapped. Execute solution alpha. Adair's thumb found the page in her notebook that was worn from use, the one with hand-drawn arcs and tiny correction symbols like stars. She set the secondary's elevation, dialed the traverse in slow, deliberate motions, then just as deliberately dialed it back a hair. Not what the book says. What the valley says. Convoy at Charlie Echo 9, the drone operator called. 2 minutes. Speed increasing. The wind lifted the edge of the tent and let it fall again. The valley exhaled. For a heartbeat, everything held still. The men, the numbers, the moment. Adair loaded the shell. The sound of it seating in a tube was a clean, hollow promise. She checked her breathing. She listened to the air. She let the math settle until the numbers felt less like marks on paper and more like a weight in her chest. Then she fired. The thump punched silence into the tent. Heads turned in a single violent motion. On the tactical display, a pale arc rose, not the arc the primary team's plot would have drawn, but one thinner, stranger, a line that seemed to lean toward the valley's lifeline and then, mid-flight, just barely change its mind. 3 heartbeats dragged by. The round struck the lead vehicle precisely as it skimmed out of the tightest bend, catching it mid-plateau. For a bright, impossible second, the armored command truck lifted, rolled, and came down on its side. The blast blew the road open. Secondary detonations leapt from the second and fourth vehicles like spark logic, fuel and munitions, turning math into fire. The rest of the convoy accordion folded into chaos. The valley filled with black smoke, climbing slow and oily into the clean morning sky. No one spoke. Even the radios seemed to forget their own noise. Direct hit on primary, the drone operator said finally, voice small with awe. Convoy neutralized. Multiple secondary explosions. No movement. Adair stepped back from the tube and set her hand on its warm skin as if it were the flank of a living thing. Her notebook lay open on the crate, numbers crowded and neat. Major Denton found his voice first. You fired without authorization. He sounded like a man trying to reassemble a world that had just come apart. That's a protocol violation. Quiet, said a voice from the entrance. Not Blackwell. Deeper. Calm. Colonel Westfield stood framed in the tent flap, dust still on his boots, eyes moving from the screen to Adair to the frozen primary team. He walked toward the secondary position without hurry, as if drawn by a map only he could see. Up close, the lines around his eyes looked like they'd been carved by a long string of mornings, just like this one. He stopped beside Adair. Good shot, he said, not softly but without drama. Then, turning to Denton, that's Lieutenant Colonel Coltrane to you. Blackwell's mouth opened and closed once, twice. Sir, the assignment listed her as. I know what the assignment said, Westfield replied. I also know what the file says. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Intel confirmation? Affirmative, the comms officer said, recovering. High-value target eliminated. Thermal signature consistent with CODOM. Secondary confirms from signals intercept. A flicker ran through the room, shock resolving into understanding, then into the complicated mixture that follows. Relief, pride, the sharp edge of embarrassment. Blackwell straightened. I was not informed of her prior rank, sir. You didn't need her rank to hear her math, Westfield said. He let that sit a beat, a fair hit that didn't draw blood. Commander, you are relieved for the remainder of this operation. Major Denton, same. The words were surgical. No heat, just incision. Reed stepped forward, spine snapping into perfect alignment. He saluted Adair with a crispness born not of drill, but of recognition. One by one, the others followed, the air filling with the soft percussion of palms on fabric, the small ritual of collective recalibration. All except Blackwell, who stood rooted to the floor, eyes pinned to the burning convoy on the screen, as if volume alone could rewind what had already happened. Westfield gestured toward the exit. Coltrane, he said, walk with me. They left the tent into a wind that smelled like metal and smoke. The mountains were the same mountains they'd been at dawn, but the day had turned a different color. After Kandahar, Westfield said as they crossed the packed dirt, they parked you where the paperwork said you'd be safe. And still you found the fight. I found the math, Adair said. It wasn't defiance. It was simply accurate. He gave her a sideways look, almost a smile. Command's message landed an hour ago. Review concluded. Full reinstatement authorized. Tactical Development Unit is yours if you want it. He paused. You already started, didn't you? In the margins. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The notebook in her hand weighed what it always had, ink, paper, and the gravity of proof. Back in the tent, the noise resumed in unnatural spurts. Orders redirected, medevac requests denied for lack of survivors, perimeter checks called in just to have something to do. The adrenaline of averted disaster frayed into meticulous tasks. Adair returned to the secondary mortar and, with the same care she'd used to fire it, began to reset it to neutral, the ritual both practical and respectful. Reed hovered, hands idle, eyes bright. You knew, he said quietly, before we had visuals. I listened, she replied. To the valley. He grinned, a quick, unguarded thing that made him look younger than his uniform allowed. And to yourself. I listened to the math, she said, but this time the correction held a softer edge. When she closed the notebook, a pencil scrap caught between pages like a flag. She slid it out, folded it once, tucked it into a side pocket. The tent hummed again, a body that had remembered its heartbeat after a sudden shock. At the door, Westfield paused, looking back over the room. We'll brief in 30, he said. But for the record, Coltrane, impossible is just a word people use when the equations are still hidden. Adair nodded. The wind pushed through the tent and left again. She could already feel the next problem forming. The shape of a new protocol, a cleaner model for terrain like this. Training that taught officers to hear the air instead of overfitting numbers from a book. The shot she'd taken would be the loudest argument she'd ever made, but arguments fade. Systems endure. On the screen, the fire kept burning, black smoke writing a lesson on the morning sky that even the most stubborn eyes could read. Accuracy isn't arrogance. It's responsibility. She set her notebook on the crate, opened to a fresh page, and wrote a single line across the top. Standard protocol, revised. They pinned the valley back together with ceremony. Morning sun spilled across the parade ground like fresh paint, turning the dust to glitter and the corrugated roofs to mirrors. Units formed in neat ranks that cut the light into clean rectangles. A portable speaker crackled. Someone adjusted a mic. In the near distance, the mountains watched with their same old patience. Adair stood at the front in a uniform that finally matched the weight of her work. The insignia rested on her shoulder like something that had been hers all along and just took the long way home. Colonel Westfield stood beside her, hands behind his back, expression tempered to that rare alloy of pride and discipline. Attention to orders, he said, voice steady through the speakers. By direction of Central Command, Lieutenant Colonel Adair Coltrane is hereby reinstated to full active duty. with all rights and responsibilities of rank. Effective immediately, she is assigned command of the Artillery Tactical Development Unit, with authority to establish doctrine for complex terrain operations. Words, signatures, seals. The ritual did what rituals do, stitching yesterday's chaos to today's order with thread everyone could see. Adair heard almost none of it. She was watching faces instead. Soldiers who'd seen the valley burn, officers adjusting the geometry of their respect, the small knots of whispering that punctuate any shift in gravity. At the front of one formation, Blackwell stood straight-backed, the effort it took to stay that's still visible in the set of his jaw. When the final sentence snapped shut, the base exhaled as one. Applause rolled forward, polite at first, then warmer as it crossed the ranks like sunlight moving over water. Adair's posture didn't change, but something unknotted behind her sternum. Not relief. Alignment. Afterward, the line formed. Handshakes, salutes, a dozen variations on congratulations. Some were genuine. Some were political. She accepted all of them with equal precision, as if each were a datum to be filed and not a claim on her attention. Reed waited until the end, because of course he did, grin barely contained. Congratulations, ma'am. Thank you, Lieutenant. She let the new rank sit between them like a friendly shock. Pack your gear. His grin broke cleanly free. Ma'am, you transfer to my unit tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. The words came out like a vow. When the line thinned to air and dust, Blackwell approached. His salute was textbook. The silence between them stretched, delicate and taut as wire. Lieutenant Colonel, he said, I owe you an apology. Do you? She kept her voice flat, not sharp. The difference mattered. I made assumptions based on incomplete information. He swallowed. And on bias. She considered him. The valley wind tugged at the edge of a flag nearby, a soft, patient sound. Did you read my file last night, Commander? I did. His gaze didn't waver. Your record is exemplary. The Kandahar action was correct, she finished, unblinking, and unacceptable to the people who liked their checklists more than their civilians. He absorbed that without flinching. I dismissed your expertise. That was a failure. It won't happen again. A good commander interrogates ideas, not identities, she said. Interrogate mine, but do it on the merits next time. Yes, ma'am. She let the beat breathe. You'll be among the first to receive training in the new protocol. His eyebrows ticked up. Despite everything? Because of everything, she said. You have reach. If you learn it well, others will follow. That's the math that matters. For a flicker of a second, something like gratitude grazed his features. He nodded, saluted, and withdrew, leaving the air less crowded. Westfield joined her at the edge of the ground where the dust broke away to scrub and rock. Merciful, he observed. Strategic, she corrected. I don't do mercy. I do outcomes. Everyone thinks they do, he said, amused. Few actually mean it. They walked toward headquarters, where an office waited that smelled like new paint and fresh wiring. The desk was too clean, the shelves politely empty, the chair adjusted to that universal wrong height of rooms that haven't learned their owner yet. On the corner of the desk stood a sealed document case with her name on the label. She opened it to find a directive stamped in tight black letters. Establish doctrine. Implement field validation. Train to proficiency. She placed it aside and set her notebook down where the light could reach it. The old leather looked at home on the fresh wood, like a landmark dropped onto a newly drawn map. A knock. Major Denton stood at the threshold, posture formal, discomfort barely caged. Lieutenant Colonel, he said. Congratulations. Adair gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit, Major. He sat, every joint at attention. I'm building a unit for variable terrain operations, she said, straightforward as a coordinate. Meteorology will be central to our modeling. Your background is relevant. His surprise flashed, unguarded, human. After how I treated you? This isn't about you or me, she said. It's about whether you can do the work and unlearn what you need to unlearn. Can you? Denton inhaled, held it, let it go. I can. Good. She slid a folder across the desk. In 3 days, I want your analysis of wind shear variance in mountainous microclimates, with recommendations for live fire compensation under time pressure. No jargon for its own sake. Useful language. Useful numbers. Yes, ma'am. And Major. He paused mid-rise. You'll start each session by crediting the source of any method you present. Not because I need my name said out loud. Because attribution trains discipline. People remember to maintain integrity in the small things. They do better under stress in the big ones. He nodded once, deeply. Understood. When the door closed behind him, the room settled around her like a garment that was finally the right size. She opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote across the top, Coltrane Adjustment, Training Protocol version 1.0. The outline arrived in segments, shorter modules stacked like barricades. Sensing the valley, modeling with incomplete data, detaching from the gospel of standard, leading a moving solution, recalculating mid-breath. She sketched a drill that forced officers to do the math by hand with radios cutting in and out, a second drill where wind shifted twice mid-sequence, a third where the right answer from the manual was a planted trap. She added a note in the margin, speed is not haste. By late afternoon, she'd filled 5 pages with scaffolding and 2 with the tone instructors would use. No sarcasm, no performative toughness, just crisp expectations and the clean consequence of getting it wrong in practice, so you don't get it wrong in war. Another knock. Read again, this time with the careful enthusiasm of someone trying not to track dust onto a new floor. Permission to speak freely? Granted. Why me? He didn't make it a self-deprecating joke. He just asked. You listen, she said. And you ask the question that moves the problem forward. You can learn the rest. He nodded, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to be told that listening counted. What do you need first? A calibration range and a meteorology cage we can break rules in. We'll build the model and break it until the breaking stops teaching us anything. That's a lot of breaking, he said, almost smiling. That's learning. He left with a list, the kind that turns a day into motion. Adair watched him go and felt, for a small, unguarded instant, the satisfaction of vectors aligning. At dusk, she crossed the base alone. The wind had shifted again, smelling faintly of rain that probably wouldn't come. At the burned edge of the valley, smoke stains clung to the rock like handwriting refusing to fade. She stood there long enough to hear the quiet noises, cooling metal, distant radios, a laugh carried thin by air. Blackwell found her there, not by design perhaps, but not by accident either. He stopped a respectful distance away. I told my officers, he said, that the next time expertise speaks, they listen before their pride reloads. Good, she said. Say it twice. He nodded, gaze on the dark smudge of the pass. My men asked me if you were lucky yesterday. He shook his head. I told them luck doesn't leave notebooks. A corner of her mouth moved. Sometimes luck reads them. Sometimes, he allowed. If you need observers for your first field validation, we'll be there. You will, she said, and let the subject die the dignified death of a problem already solved. Back in her office, the lamp cast a circle of working light. She transferred the day's outline into a cleaner draft, swapping a verb here, tightening a phrase there. She set the cadence of the first training day, brief, drill, debrief, revise, repeat, until the schedule looked like a heartbeat. She added a final line at the bottom. Measure respect in adoption, not applause. Westfield stepped in without knocking. The way people do when the door is more tradition than barrier. Command wants a preliminary brief by 0700, he said, setting a tablet on her desk. They'll rubber stamp whatever you write as long as it looks like you thought about the politics. Try to think about the politics. I did, she said. I'm inviting Blackwell's unit. He watched her for a moment, weighing, approving. You're building a doctrine and a culture at the same time. That's the harder shot. The aim is the same, she said. Point of impact where it does the most good. He smiled almost. Try not to make a habit of saving careers while you rewrite the book. No promises. When he left, she turned the lamp a fraction and dragged the back of the pen along her lower lip. an old thinking tic she rarely let anyone see. The office had learned her shape by then. The chair gave a little. The desk caught the heel of her palm where she liked it. The window framed the mountains just so. She opened the notebook to the first page, where years ago she'd written a line to remind herself in lean seasons. Do the math even when no one is watching. She added a new one beneath it, small and neat. Teach the math until everyone can see. Outside, the flag snapped once in a sudden gust and settled. The base settled with it. Somewhere in the night, welders sparked a cage into existence, and a range officer filled out a form with a name he'd only learned that morning. Wind slid down the ridges and thinned into the flat. By the time the stars burned through, the shape of the unit had crystallized, a handful of officers who would unlearn and relearn with discipline, a commander who would take training from the woman he'd ignored, a colonel who knew how to step forward and then step back, a lieutenant who listened like it was a weapon. And at the center, a notebook. Not a trophy, a tool. Tomorrow, the breaking would begin. And then method. And then doctrine. Respect would come last and quietly, like dawn finding the valley after a long cold night, lighting everything as if it had always been that way. 2 weeks later, the war came to meet her mathematics. Orders came down in the dark hours, printed on a single sheet and stamped with the kind of urgency that meant more than the red ink did. Insurgent forces had moved into a mountain sector notorious for killing operations without firing a shot. Weather, terrain, and bad assumptions doing the work for them. Standard artillery doctrine had failed there twice in as many years. Now Central Command wanted the Coltrane adjustment tested in the wild. When Colonel Westfield handed her the folder, his face was unreadable. They want your unit deployed immediately. Mountainous AO, microclimate shifts, enemy on the move. Adair flipped through the reconnaissance photos, wind speed projections, and elevation maps. The variables stacked in her mind like a puzzle that wanted solving. Timeline: 48 hours to be in position. They've paired us with an infantry unit already forward deployed. She scanned the assignment details, noting the name. Blackwell. Westfield raised an eyebrow. Problem. Opportunity, she said, and shut the folder. The forward base sat at the lip of a valley narrower and meaner than Epsilon's, its slopes jagged like teeth. The air was thinner here, the wind sharper, the silence between gusts oddly deep. Adair's team set up the meteorology cage, calibration targets, and plotting stations with the precision of drill and the mild nervousness of people about to see if their months of preparation would hold when the wind started lying. Blackwell met her on the line, uniform immaculate despite the grit, his salute crisp. Lieutenant Colonel, my unit is briefed on your protocol. We'll provide observers at each forward position. She nodded. Good. We'll start calibration at 0600. Your spotters will report every deviation, however small. If we're off by 2 meters, I want to know it before it matters. For a moment, his gaze held hers. We've got full confidence in your method. She didn't answer with thanks, just the math works. That's all that matters. At first light, the mountains blushed in the sun's first touch. Adair's gunners fired the opening calibration rounds. One after another, shells arced and landed on their marks, tight clusters in rock and scrub miles away. Observers called in confirmations with a steadiness that built its own momentum. Then the call came. Fire support request, grid Delta 49er, moving target, hostile convoy. The kind of test no training could mimic. Adair was already at the plotting station, scanning wind, telemetry, elevation, and the projected path. Lead by 65 meters, she said, voice calm but quick. Wind shift in 30 seconds. Load adjustment Bravo 7. Fire on my mark. Primary gunner, ready. She counted the seconds in her head, listening past the tent noise to the wind's low whistle outside. Now, the mortar thumped. On the feed, the round's arc looked almost lazy, until it dropped directly in front of the lead vehicle, the blast halting the convoy in a tangle of wreckage. Secondary fires took the rest. The spotters' voices came in clipped with excitement. Direct hit, no survivors, objective secure. Blackwell's voice followed, low but clear. Textbook, Lieutenant Colonel. No, better than textbook. The next 72 hours unfolded like proof written on the ground. Every fire mission called for in that time landed within margin, rarely more than a meter or two from aim point. Infantry positions reported enemy units neutralized before they could mount counterattacks. Supply routes stayed open, collateral damage stayed at zero. It wasn't perfect, no plan in war was, but it was decisive. The Coltrane adjustment had passed its trial not in sterile simulations, but under the messy, shifting reality of combat. When they rotated back to the forward base, the mood was different. Soldiers moved with the easy tiredness of victory, that paradoxical mix of relief and readiness for the next call. Westfield met her at the operations tent with a message tablet. Central Command's review, he said. They're adopting the adjustment as standard doctrine for complex terrain artillery operations. Effective immediately. Adair read the brief twice. Good. We start training instructors next week. Westfield smirked. They've also added a commendation to your file. She set the tablet down. That's fine, but the training matters more. You really can't enjoy a win, can you? I enjoy accuracy, she said. And lives saved. Weeks later, back at Epsilon, she watched the first wave of Coltrane-certified instructors disperse to other bases. Her office was littered with topographical maps, wind pattern studies, and half-drunk mugs of coffee. Captain Reed, promoted since the operation, stood at her desk, briefing folder in hand. First training teams ready to deploy, ma'am, he said. She closed the notebook she'd been working in. Remind them this isn't about memorizing a formula. It's about thinking differently. Terrain lies. Weather lies. People lie. The math doesn't. Yes, ma'am. He hesitated. Permission to speak freely? Granted. You never wanted the recognition. But without it, your method might have stayed in that notebook. Sometimes you have to be seen for the work to survive. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. A valid calculation, Captain. Visibility equals adoption equals lives saved. She opened the notebook again, wrote that line neatly in the margin, and underlined it twice.